Alright, we have an Xbox Series X HDMI repair today. I'm going to go ahead and go over the tools that you will need to repair the HDMI port. Alright, one of the first things that you're going to need is a T9 bit, which is like one of those little star pattern bits there. You can use it in like a screwdriver version, or you can use it in a drill version, which is how I use it here. You're going to need a longer one. You could use a long one the whole time, or you can have a short one and a long one and just switch them out, which is what I do. I use pliers to help out a little bit. You don't want to use pliers if you're, not very careful or anything like that. You may want to use something else, or you could just use your fingers. I use a ton of tweezers. These flat ones I use for disassembly. These pointy ones I use for anything to do with like the soldering part on the board or anything like that. And of course, most importantly, we're gonna need something to clean it out with. I like to use a brush. This is just a regular painting brush that I've been using for quite some time, and it does a great job. Alright, for the soldering part, you're gonna need somewhere to work on. This is just like a little marble tile. I use this to put the motherboard on. You're also gonna need flux and 60-40 solder. It's leaded solder, helps release the port easier. You can use a microscope. If you don't have a microscope, you don't technically need one. If you're able to see, things really well with your eyesight, normally you don't really need one. They also have like cheap little cameras and stuff that you can use that have microscopes on them. Of course, you're going to need a soldering iron to do any of the soldering. And in my scenario, I'm going to be using a heat gun in order to heat the motherboard up where the port is, so I can take the port off a little easier. Having Q-tips is really important too. This is how I clean off the flux, as well as clean the spots that I'm working on with the HDMI port. Alright, so temperatures on your machine here. So I have my soldering iron set at 450 and my hot air set at 480. These vary depending on which one that you get. My airflow on this one is all the way up. I need it all the way up in order to take off the ports. Having the proper airflow and heat for the air gun is super important. It helps determine how long and how well you're going to be able to take the port off. You definitely want the board to heat up, and with an Xbox Series X, the motherboard is thicker than other motherboards on other consoles, so it does take longer to heat it up. But those are just the temperatures that I use with my weld lugs here. Alright, first thing first, we need to take off these two screws on the back. This one, you'll just have to cut out where the piece of tape is here. This one has a little warranty sticker on it. You're just going to have to take that off. And in order to pop this open, we're just going to use the back of our tweezers here. We're just going to pry. You want to pry closer to the middle because there's two tabs on the end here. You don't want to break those tabs. And then you're just going to pull up and slide out. So obviously this is why we use our brush to clean it out, because there's a lot of dust inside of this. Alright, so you can see that there is quite a bit of dust buildup in there. Like, this is a huge amount, so we're going to go ahead and clean that out. Alright, we got a majority of the dust out. We're going to go ahead and take off the screws, and then we'll just dust everything off as we disassemble. So on top here, you're going to have 4 screws right here, 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 and here. So we're going to go ahead and take those off really quick. Alright, so in order to take this base off here, there's a little tiny tab in here, which we're just going to use our flat tweezers to pull out on that tab, like so. And then we'll just turn the base and pull it off. And we're going to need to take off 4 screws here. 1, 2, 3, 4. The different colors of screws here. The green ones are the machine screws, and the black ones are for plastic, holding plastic together. Alright, for disassembling all of this out of the box here. There's a little tab inside of here that we're just going to lift up on with our flat tweezers, and then we can pull this little ribbon cable out here. It does have sticky stuff underneath it, so most of the time that little tab breaks off just like that. We're just going to slide our flat tweezers underneath here carefully, and we're just going to try to pull it up evenly. Try to remove the sticky stuff from underneath that so we can pull that out. Like so. Alright, and for this one here, there's a little tab on the inside here, which if you're looking inside of there, you just push down on that tab, and then you carefully pull up on this. You want to make sure you don't yank it out, because if you yank it out, it'll break this, and if you break this, your Xbox will not work. So now we've got those ribbons out, we can go ahead and take out the connector here for the fan, and slide the fan out. Obviously that's dirty, so we need to clean it. Alright, in order to get this piece off here, there's a little tab inside of here, that hole right there. You're just going to push on that and push it up a little bit. Once that's released, you can kind of pull up from right here and then pull the whole thing off. Alright, now we need to remove the disk drive here. So with these first little groups of cables, we're just going to go ahead and pop that one off. This one's harder to get off. This is when I use my pliers to get this off. You just want to make sure you're hanging onto it tight and don't yank up too hard. And then this just slides out. Alright, we're going to go ahead and pull the console out of the box. You're going to slide it back a little bit and then pull up, and it'll just come out like that. Obviously this box is pretty dirty, so we will need to wipe this out. And of course we're going to need to brush this off here because this is fairly dirty as well. Alright, now that we've dusted it off a little bit, we're going to need to take off this rubber strip here. It just pulls off these little clips and then slides up, and that's off. Now we need to take off this little board here, and we're just going to unscrew that same size bit. And that just pulls off. Alright, so on the front here we have this screw here, here, these three, this one back here, one under here, and here. We will need to take all of those off. Now that we have those screws off, we can take off this little cover here, and then we can also lift up here. This is where the power connection is, and we're just going to lift up on this tab, slide this cable out, and then we can gently lift this off here and set that to the side. Now we're going to use our longer bit to get the screws off on the power supply here. Alright, now that we have those screws off, we can go ahead and remove the power supply. So you're going to want to lift up on this tab here, and then you're going to squeeze this little tab here together and lift off that connector. You're going to gently lift this power supply up. You don't want to yank it that way, because if you do it, it could break the power supply here. So we're going to push in the tab down here that connects the power supply to the board, and we're just going to move it back and forth gently until it comes out free like that. And this is the tab we were holding down. Alright, we need to remove this giant ribbon cable here. There's a tab here that you push in, and a tab here on this side that you're going to push down in order to get this ribbon cable out. Squeeze both of those, gently wiggle carefully side to side until that pops out. Now we can go ahead and lift up this top board here. And then feed the ribbon through here to expose the bottom board. We're going to be taking off the bottom of this ribbon cable the same way we took off the top. You're going to squeeze both sides and gently lift it off. We're going to be taking off this very useless aluminum piece here, or steel piece, whatever it is. And you're just going to lift up on there's like a little longer insert right there, and you're just going to lift up on those and peel them backwards around all the sides until you can carefully get it off. You need to be very careful when you take this off because you can damage the components around here and you don't want to press against any of those. So you need to make sure that you're very careful when you take that off. Also, you can go ahead and throw this away now. You won't need it again. We're going to be removing these 4 screws here. I don't remove them completely. I loosen up the tension first. That way when you do remove them, this doesn't like fling off, because if it does, you risk damaging components. So as you can see here, there's no tension on it. And now we can carefully lift that off. For removing this bottom board here, we're just going to slide our tweezers underneath here and pry up. You want to make sure that you don't stick it too far into the green part of the board, because that will, there's a cockroach right there. Hang on. Alright, now that nasty thing has been deleted from existence, we're going to go ahead and slide the back end of our tweezers under here and just carefully lift up on each one of the golden edges here. Like I said before, if you get too far in and you get to the green and you try to pry, what will happen is you will more than likely knock off components, and you do not want to do that because that makes a simple repair a more lengthy repair. Alright, now we can go ahead and remove the board. Alright, so this is the HDMI port that we're going to be removing. We're going to go ahead and put some flux on the back of the port before we start heating it up. What flux does is it spreads the heat out along the board so heat isn't directed to one spot but to multiple spots. Flux is not conductive, so you don't have to clean it up all the way whenever you're doing this repair. You just need to get a majority of it off, because otherwise it's just going to make a huge mess. So now we can go ahead and put our heat to the bottom of the HDMI port. So as you can see here, the flux has melted. It is now underneath the port here, which is exactly where we want it, because we want it on the pins on the back of the port and on the feet holes here. As we heat it up, we're going to go ahead and add some of our leaded solder to it. Leaded solder will make it to where the board can be removed with a lower amount of heat. That way we don't damage the board. And we're just going to be feeding it into the little feet holes right here and right here. And on the pins on the back, we're going to go ahead and feed it on those too. Alright, so now that we've added our solder here, and we've been heating up the port for a while, it's pretty loose. It's not going to pop off perfectly. You're going to need to do a little bit of wiggling for it because there's a little piece of epoxy underneath these ports on the Xbox Series X. So now that we broke that epoxy free here, we can go ahead and take the port off like so. We're gonna go ahead and remove this epoxy while holding heat to it, just by simply grabbing it and moving it off. Now we're gonna grab our solder sucker here, and we're gonna take the use the sucker to get the solder out of each one of these feet holes. It may take a couple times depending on how hot you have your air gun, because the old solder that's in here does take a higher temperature. So if it doesn't want to come out, you just feed some of your leaded solder in there again and then just suck it out, and it should come out perfectly. This is our area where the HDMI port sits. So as you can see, there's no more solder in these feet holes here. There's a clump of solder on the pads. That's from the solder that we added when we were going to remove the port here. You also want to make sure that most of this epoxy that was here is scraped off. It will cause the port to sit wonky on there when it comes time to putting the new one on. For the extra solder sitting here on the pads, we're just going to take our soldering iron and run it across until each one of those pads looks nice and shiny. Now that that area is nice and clean, we're going to go ahead and throw our port on top of there, and just want to make sure that it sits where it's supposed to sit. It is sitting up a little bit here. That's okay. There it goes. And then we're just going to go ahead and heat it back up. Alright, so now that we've heated it up to a melting point, those little pins in the back of the port are sitting perfectly on the pads there, and they're all secured. You need that solder back there to turn into a liquid in order for those pins to connect to those pads. Now we're going to go ahead and feed solder to the feet holes here as we heat it up again in order to mount the port properly. Alright, so as you can see here, I've got solder feeding to the front there. Now we just need to feed it to the back here. And we're going to do the same thing on both sides. Alright, so as you can see, the feet holes there are mounted. And what I like to do is just go back through and carefully test each one of these pins by just tapping it with some tweezers, making sure that they don't move. If they move, like this one, you will have to reheat it again. Alright, now that we've reheated it, that fourth pin in from the left here is nice and secure, as well as the other pins, so we can go ahead and assemble it back together. You want to make sure that you let the board cool down before you assemble it. If not, it could cause power issues. This is what the new port should look like, with each one of those pins in the back there secured on the pads, and each one of these footholes here should have solder on them. That way that you know the new port has been set right on the board. Now that we have the board sitting on the heatsink where we want it to be sitting, we're going to go ahead and screw this part in here. You want to make sure, if you're using a drill, not to have it above the number 3 on the settings. Of course, it doesn't show the 3 here, but it's on 3. And we're going to do the same thing as when we took it off. You're just going to screw each one in, not all the way down. Try to go opposite ends first. Screw them down about 1/3 of the way. And then once you have them screwed in like that, just go ahead and adjust this to where it seems like it's sitting straight and aligned, and then we can go ahead and screw those down. And then we can go ahead and pop the fat ribbon back in here, and it just clicks in. Feed the fat ribbon through this slot here, and make sure that these pins align with the holes when you're setting this board on here. And then go ahead and pop that in place too. We need to put the power supply back in. Connect this first connector down in here. It should click into place like so. And then just lay it back down here. Make sure these pins go through the guide holes. And then from there, we can go ahead and connect this connector and close this gate here. Then we can go ahead and put this piece back on here. You just want to be careful of these cables here. Those are for the disk drive. You break those, your console won't work. So we just need to be careful. And then we can go ahead and slide a little power cable connector here, and then close this gate. And then we're going to get the screws back in. Don't forget to put this little cover on here. And we're going to go ahead and slide this board back in with the connector going in here. And then get each one of these screws in here. Make sure you don't torque these screws. If you're using a handgun to get them in, do not go overdrive with it. You need to carefully put these in. We're going to go ahead and slide this rubber guy back on here, flat side first, wrap it around. And as we're wrapping it around, there's a little hole in the side here that you're going to go ahead and pop through here. Wrap it around the top. Those 3 will match up in the holes, and then it wraps back around that first little clip. To put the console back in, we need to make sure we get these ribbons out of the way before we slide it in. And then once you slide it in, you're gonna push it forward. Line this ribbon cable up, slide it in. Once you slide it in, close the gate. And then you can just pop this one in. Fan slides in, simple and easy. Disk drive connectors go in, simple and easy. This piece here slides in, simple and easy. Now we need to screw all the screws back in. The guide in the middle of this plate goes in the guide in the middle of the console here. Just turn it until it locks.